Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of the State of Leadership Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. He is going to introduce our guests in just a moment. I am Whitney Wiley, and you are here for the State of Leadership Simple and Beyond. This is the third Thursday of January, and we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. And so we've got a great show for you today. We're going to be talking with our guests. We're going to be talking about self-awareness and its interplay with leadership. Our guest has invited us both to take an assessment. We're going to discuss with you live, fresh, right, without any rehearsal, the results of that assessment, and get some insight on exactly how self-aware we are around some of the issues that popped up. So, any opening thoughts before you introduce our guest, Robert?
No, this should be interesting. Like I said, I was not surprised, and I'm sure you won't be either. So let's do it.
All right, let's do it.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce our guest. And so, before entering the corporate training space, Emily Ramos spent 15 years working with dynamic teams across the country on high-profile projects, giving her a unique vantage point of how people work. In 2020, Emily launched Catch Workplace Coaching and Consulting based on the idea that people do their best work when they understand themselves and their teammates better. With that, we welcome Emily Ramos to our show.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you for being here.
Absolutely.
I love, when we met and then had a subsequent conversation, we were talking, and then when you sent your information over, I'm like, you're so in alignment with where Robert and I are about work and leadership. And it just seemed to me that this was a natural fit for you to join us on the show. So thank you for being here.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree. It's so nice to be able to share this. And I think this is a fit for a lot of people. This is really a popular topic in the workplace now.
Absolutely. Great. So let's get started. We typically ask the same questions with a slightly different flavor, depending on who we have on the show. So we start out with the same ones, and we're going to do it a little different because we took this assessment, and we'll figure out when we'll, put that in there and talk about the results. So the first question I'd like to ask you is it's really a statement. Tell us about your leadership journey and what led to you doing the work that you do today.
Yeah, it's a great question. And, for me, I shared a little bit in that bio. My career path has taken many different forms. So I've been a network news producer, a fourth grade teacher, and a founding team member at a startup in Silicon Valley. So I've had lots, and now I run my own business. So I've had lots of different workplace environments and scenarios where I had to work very quickly with lots of different types of personalities. As I was moving through my career on sort of my personal life, I got exposed to coaching and personal development work, and I was just hooked. I had always had this driving curiosity of, why am I the way that I am? Why do I think the way that I think? Why do I act the way that I act? And, to put it sort of back into a workplace setting, there would be times at work where, maybe I'd get assigned a big story or there'd be a big challenge, and I would rise to the occasion, and it would be this huge career highlight for me. And other times the exact opposite happened, where I would would feel defeated, and I thought, why is that? What's happening? And so I found myself in my career sort of relying more and more on what I was learning sort of in my personal life and these courses and trainings and psychology classes I was taking. And then over time, it just sort of became more of a natural fit that, this actually is part of the secret sauce of being successful at work, is bringing some of this personal awareness to our professional selves. And so then 4 years ago, I had the opportunity to make this my full-time work. And in some ways, I think I sort of bring that question and that curiosity into workplace settings and say, why are we acting the way that we're acting? Why are we the way that we are? And, it turns out a lot of people are curious about that too.
That's amazing. So you mentioned a little bit about some setbacks. So what challenges did you face along the way?
Oh, yeah, good question. The challenges are numerous, and they're still happening, right? This is all happening here as expected. But I think if I were to try to sort of summarize some of the challenges, I think especially earlier in my career, I really didn't know who I was. And that meant I was running around trying to be what I thought other people wanted me to be. Or often too, I would see what someone who was happy and successful was doing, and I would mimic that or mirror that and think, well, I want to feel the way that I think they feel. So let me do what they're doing. And that should be the formula for success. I see your heads nodding, like, no surprise. This is probably the quickest path to burnout, is to being someone you're not. And so it was a real struggle. I sort of say it now and even have sort of a half smile on my face as I say it, but it's very confusing, to not have that strong sense of self, and then to be in really high profile settings, or, any workplace setting. It can really be a drain. We spend so much of our lives, in our careers, and that was a big missing piece for me.
I love that you talked about one, curiosity, sort of in your opening, and this question of, or having that feeling of not knowing who you were. And I would agree with you that we spend so much time trying to be someone else, or who we think other people want or need us to be, particularly in the workplace, that burnout is it's an predictable outcome. And it's unfortunate because it is being who we are, and that allows us to bring our best selves to work, right? And then it becomes that diversity of who we are as people, how we think, our life experiences, etc., that allow us to create teams that do extraordinary work, right? Rather than having, 12 people on a team who all think alike, speak alike, had the same experiences, and come in and we don't do a lot of discussion about politics here on this program, but over the course of the last election season, there was a lot of talk about DEI, right? And when I think of DEI, I'm thinking particularly on the diversity piece. This is what I'm talking when I'm thinking about it, this diversity of who we are as people and what we bring to the table, and not necessarily the boxes that people check. Those things are important, but they pale in comparison, I believe, to what we individually bring to the table. And so if we feel like we can't do that, we don't have diverse environments, but then we can't ever feel included, because it's not really us, right? And I know being authentic and being an authentic leader is also a part of the work that you do.
Absolutely. And you're spot on, Whitney. And the one other piece I would add to that is, if you play that out, if you don't really know who you are, you're not moving up very quickly either. Right? Because it's like there has to be a you there to know what you're good at, to find your best environment, to find the environment that's going to bring out the best in you. If that's a missing piece, it's, you might do similar to what I did, some career jumping, right?
Yeah, and it reminds me of that statement, what got you here, right? So that piece of what got you here, you leave some of you behind, you have to continue leaving a piece of you behind. And it does impact your ability to move, I think, in ways that suit you, serve you, and serve your organizations.
That's right.
And so being willing to be who you are in the workplace is important, but you can't do that if you don't know who you are.
That's right. Yep. The ultimate bind.
So we like to ask this next question to everybody that comes on, and we're always amazed at the variety of the answer. So we're all about leadership on our show. So we ask this question: what's your leadership philosophy?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what we were just talking about, to me, the most effective leaders, and this is regardless of a title, by the way, people can be leaders at any level. And I think the most effective ones are authentic. They do know themselves, right? And they also have the ability, so they know themselves, there's a strong kind of home base there, but they also have the ability and the keen awareness to flex in really strategic, efficient ways so that they can work really well with others without creating that burnout that we were just talking about, right? So an effective leader is someone who can, get the quote unquote, most difficult person on the team bought in so that they're not derailing every team meeting. Or they see the junior salesperson with tons of enthusiasm and they find ways to really leverage that creativity so that they are still excited about coming into work, right? Like that, but without over indexing to any individual, they still have that real strong sense of self.
That's really great. We talk about that a lot. It sounds a little bit like situational leadership, something that Whitnie and I talk about a lot on our show. And it's always amazing to me when I work with leaders that have one style that they employ with every single person, and sooner or later they hit a wall, and because not everybody will respond to that. And a lot of these leaders they get frustrated because they don't know how to flex and switch, like you're saying.
Well, excellent point. And the thing about that too, there may be some short-term results in that, right? Mm-hmm. And so people really want the job or they want the thing on their resume. So okay, we're going to go along with that style. But the type of leaders that, I was just talking about, these are the ones that when they go to a new workplace and they call you and say, hey, we're looking for someone. And you say, let me just put in my 2 weeks notice. I'll be right there. Right? Like, because you want to be with that person because you really like their leadership. And to me, that's that real effective leadership, or people that you remember for years down the road. Also, a personal example, I keep in touch with an old boss I had from ABC News from 20 years ago. We have Zoom calls every once in a while just to say hi and check in. I mean, that's a real special role for someone to play in your life when they are able to bring that level of authenticity to their job.
Yeah, good leaders are also good mentors. And yes. When we find that person, we tend to connect with them and keep them in our lives for a longer period of time. Yeah. So
let me ask this before you go to the next question, Robert. So, Emily, in terms of, and not just the leader you were talking about from ABC, but in terms of sort of before you became the coach and the facilitator and the person that helps other people become the best versions of themselves, what did you notice about the leaders that you responded to, right? So taking a step back and maybe not putting it in the terms that you put it into now as a coach, but what did you see as patterns or something that just resonated with you with the leaders that you did resonate with?
I love that question. I mean, but they were people that I wanted to emulate, right? Like there was just something about them that I was like, yeah, I actually want to be like that. I want to do more of what they are doing. There was a real, like, even as I talk about it, I noticed myself like leaning in, right? Like there was a very natural, like lean into a certain style. And so the flavors that, really appealed to me would be a level of organization and groundedness, and a drive, but still putting people first. And so that's like my preference, is to know that I matter and then the work task matters. Other people will have that preference in a different order, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But so for me, that really resonated.
And I think it's important to recognize that you knew this is what resonates with me. Someone else on your team needs to know what resonates with them. And it may not be the same things in that
Right.
same person, or it may not be the same person, and that's okay. And all of that comes back to this concept of self-awareness and understanding self and how you show up and what matters to you, what your talents are, what your gifts are, how you then impact other people. Because if you don't know that from the side, and we absolutely agree with you, we're all leaders regardless of title. We're leaders in different ways and in different contexts. And so when you are, let's say, not in a position of leadership, your ability to understand about yourself is just as important as it is for leaders. And I feel like if we spent more time helping our team members, employees, be more self-aware, that as they make the shift to leadership in titled positions, particularly, as they make that shift, they take that self-awareness along with them. And I think one of the things that we know is that a lot of organizations do not provide the tools, the resources, the training that people who are put in positions of leadership actually need to be able to lead well. So that if you have that self-awareness on the front end, that you'll make sure, whether your organization provides that or not, that you continue to be self-aware and recognize what you need in order to be the best version of yourself now in a leadership capacity.
Spot on. I agree with you completely. And, the other piece to that too is typically we think that the sort of the onus of understanding the team is with the manager. Team members can advocate for themselves and help the manager and say, you know what, I'm someone who likes to have all the information in advance. So if I ask a lot of questions in our team meetings, that's why. Could you imagine? Like, okay, got it. I'm sending it to you, right? It's so helpful, and it increases engagement on both sides, which we know, engagement is just down across the board right now in almost every industry. And to be able to have that kind of self-advocacy just goes such a long way in really increasing that engagement that we're all wanting.
Absolutely. And it would probably keep a lot of people, other team members, managers, team members, from thinking, oh, this person is, like a fly in the ointment, rather than recognizing that's what they need. And it's one of the things when we get to the assessment, I was like, oh, okay, that explains that.
I should have like a program or a workshop called That Explains That. Yes, that's exactly it.
I was like, oh, okay, I get that now.
Yep.
Right, so my next question, and I'm going to just give you a little spoiler alert. After this question, I'm going to go off script a little bit. So
great.
Next question here is, what additional challenges do women face as leaders?
Yeah, I think there's sort of two camps or two sort of themes that I see. One is a little bit of what I described sort of earlier in my career, is trying to be everything to everyone. Mm-hmm. So being over accommodating, overly flexible, again, just straight to burnout. And then the other sort of theme that I see is that there's some, really powerful female leaders that are very results oriented, task driven, have like a competitive spirit. Mm-hmm. They sometimes are not seen very favorably, or they, where they may be considered to be cold or aggressive, whereas a male counterpart may have more favorable terms to describe, very similar behavior.
It always amazes me how you see this thing where if a woman does what a guy does, then she gets labeled all these negative things, right?
Right.
On the flip side of that, though, I have been the victim of or privy to women leaders that were they wanted to be like men so much that it made them unappealing. You're taking all the bad qualities that bad male leaders have and incorporating that. And so it really, how do you help your clients reach female clients, strike a balance with that?
Great question. And it all, to me, goes back to that authenticity, right? Is that we still have to be who we are, and with some refinements, right? Like over time, like it's not just, oh, come however you like. It's really like, okay, if I am this way, I'm not going to mimic and be inauthentic and try to mimic my male counterparts. But if I just have this like really competitive driving spirit, I'm going to do that. And then I'm actually going to flex a little bit so that maybe my message goes down softer, because I am aware that as a female leader, I might be viewed differently. So I'm going to say, hi and thank you a little bit more than I would naturally do. Fine. Research actually shows we only need to shift our behavior by 5 or 10% to create a better connection with other people. So we're not talking about abandoning who we are. We're like, be authentic, really get to know that, and then, be aware of how to strategically shift so that you can be who you want to be at work. We don't want any of these things to get in the way, right?
That's great.
And women who have, and so going to the sort of balanced piece of this, women who have been maybe historically logical, analytical, and I'll say assertive rather than the other A word that women are called, right? But assertive and well-meaning, pleasant, right? And not rude. So they're not rude in their communication at all, but getting labeled as such. When you are that logical, sort of the more left brain side, right? And you've done that intentionally, modeling the way men do it. Do you find that as you're having conversation with women clients in particular, that that they can go back and be a little more heart-centered, to not overly woo-woo or emotional or anything like that, but that you help them give themselves, I guess, permission,
yes,
right, to tap into what makes women leaders actually effective. And the studies show that women leaders, have more, because of empathy and some other traits that are more inherently female, that actually makes them better leaders. Do you have an easier time getting them to shift back to who they really are, or do you find that they are sort of stuck in, again, this is what got me here, and so I'm holding on to this?
Yeah, again, great question. And I think that the good news is that we all have the ability to flex in multiple different ways, right? So I'm very feelings based. I can also flex and be very results driven. What we want to be careful of is we don't want to lead to burnout. And so the example I use of what it may feel like for someone in the case that you just described, maybe it's a woman who is, very results driven, analytical, facts based. She may be in a one-on-one with a direct report who just wants to talk about how they feel about their job. That may be very exhausting to that leader to do that. Doesn't mean she can't do it. It just means it's going to require a certain amount of energy, and her preference will always probably naturally swing back more to like agenda and tasks and work. And that's okay. But we just want to bring that awareness to, okay, when you work with certain individuals or when you're, doing certain types of tasks, you're going to want to flex this, like learn to use this muscle a little bit more. And then we can still kind of go back to that more authentic self. But part of our authentic self is the ability to flex across all different parts of the spectrum.
I think that's probably the piece right there that is really what needs to be communicated, right? Is that we have the ability to flex.
Yes.
We have the ability to shift and to change, and that our brains are wired to do that. It does take effort, right? It takes effort. And the sort of the challenge that I see is that when people are a particular way, that any attempt to go sort of counter to that it doesn't stick the first time, or that one time, says that either they shouldn't do it, or that it creates a new sense of, I don't want to say imposter syndrome, but it creates a feeling that there's something wrong with them because they did it and it didn't stick, right? And now I'm not that way, rather than recognizing that when you are, if you try to drive your car without turning on the engine and turn the wheel, right? Because there's no movement, no moment. It's harder to do that. And you're starting from zero, so to speak. And so it's going to take extra effort to do something that's a little different than the way you've been used to. But that doesn't mean that you can't, and that it takes a little bit of time and effort. And again, it's one of those situations where giving yourself permission, you don't have to get it right all the time, and giving yourself permission, because another thing that we talk about here a lot is your vision as a leader. What is it that you want? What are you moving towards? And if your goal is to, help your people be the best versions of themselves while you're doing the same, one, you've got to model that, and you have to be okay with taking the extra time and energy that it takes to get where you're trying to go.
Yes, you're exactly right. And I think, knowing the why behind it, like we don't want to spend too much time on areas that are not our natural strength, because we won't get much of an ROI on it. But if there is something that's getting in our way or is not allowing us to be who we want to be, then we do exactly what you said, which is practice, right? And build that muscle.
So we're almost at the half-hour mark. So what I'd like to do is just deviate a little bit, and talk about the assessment.
Great.
Because we're going to cover, as we do that, I suspect we're going to hit all those different self-awareness bases as we do this. And I'm chuckling. So Whitnie, how would you like to talk about the assessment?
So Emily, why don't you explain what it is and what it's used for in your business, your practice, and then we can go into Robert's results. I mean, you can talk about our results.
Perfect. I love it. So the assessment that I gave you both is called the Insights Discovery Profile. And Insights is a tool that I use with my clients, and it works really well in team settings also, to measure our preferences, right? This is what we've been talking about, where we have a way that we prefer to work. We have a way that we prefer to communicate. We have a way that we prefer to lead. So we just measure those preferences. And then that helps us then develop this like, okay, who am I? And then it's a very elegant framework. There's only 4 different categories of personalities, where we can say, okay, if I prefer a little bit more in this category and Robert prefers a little bit more in this category, how do we bridge that gap? What does Robert need from me? What's my 5 or 10% flex for Robert? And what's his 5 or 10% flex for Whitney? There you go. Now we've got a real balanced situation happening on our team instead of, I can't believe, I'll use myself as an example. Like, I can't believe Emily is still talking about how she feels about that decision. Let's move on, right? It's like, oh, someone who prefers that way, she might need to go get coffee and just like talk this out. And then we can get back with the team.
I love it. I love it. And this is one of those areas where I am not your assessment for it specifically, but just with clients and managers that I train, the importance of understanding everyone on the team and each of the team members understand, right? So when the assessments are done, that it needs to be done for everyone, and then there needs to be conversations about that so that people are aware, not put in boxes, but aware of how you can use the information, the data, the feedback in order to work together more effectively.
That's right, because everything that's in this assessment and any of these assessments, it's already happening in the workplace, right? We just don't know how to talk about it. And you can't really fix or adjust or address something that you don't know how to talk about. And really, I think one of the most damaging things we can do is attribute it to that person instead of, this is just people. This is human behavior that we're talking about. And so in order to work with humans, I know I need to have, the skill set. And we wouldn't want to say like, oh, I can never work with someone like Emily again, right? We wouldn't want that to sort of start to develop in a work culture.
Love that.
I think this is really timely and interesting for me. But a side note, I have a client that took this assessment and frequently references it. So it's very, very useful. I did not give the assessment to her. She did that through another agency, but I ended up working with this client, and it has been very impactful for her.
Can I ask this question before Emily starts to share, when we start talking about our result? I'm just curious, Robert, if she took this somewhere else, you have an assessment that you do. Did you do your assessment? And was there any, if you did, any dovetailing of the information that was learned?
I did not.
Okay.
I did not give her my assessment, but as I was going through this, I can see there is some dovetailing.
Okay. Awesome.
All right.
So
Emily,
tell me, Emily.
This is great. Well, and so I have the vantage point of also seeing both of yours, but you have not seen each other's. Right. So Robert, I know you said that you saw yours and you said, yep, like no surprises here. I'm actually going to toss the question back to you. Like what did it capture that felt like really obvious to you?
I'm a Virgo. The exacting nature of how how I do my business. I have to have things in a certain way. It talked about, and Whitney's going to probably laugh at this, having the tendency to sometimes overanalyze things. I like intellectual stuff. It talked about that. It was really interesting to me that when I was reading the results, I figured you were going to laugh, Emily, when you saw all the books behind me. But it really talked about that. So it was really spot on. And it did talk about what really resonated with me was when it said the people that I don't necessarily get along with, those people that like to ingratiate themselves to me. I find that to be disingenuous. So it was very accurate.
That's great to hear. Yeah. And Robert, I agree. I think you can even do an assessment just on people's like work backgrounds. And you can probably start typing people that way. But yeah. And I sort of hear also just like a a sense of like, yes, this is who I am. Like, I do like the details. I do want that information. And I don't want people like, too much coming at me. Like, my guess is you wouldn't love networking events.
No.
Yeah. Right. and that's fine. And that's good to know. But my guess is also if we did like force you to the, podcast local holiday party, that you would find a couple of people there that and dive deep in conversation with them. And that would be sort of your key to success, in that setting.
Yeah, absolutely. I am, as I like to say, a recovering introvert. And people usually don't know that or guess that about me, because when they see me, I tend to be a little more outgoing than they would expect. But that is because it's been years and years of me breaking through that, not wanting to interact or whatever.
And that's actually, it's a really good point too that I wanted to share, which is, if we had all taken the same assessment 5 years ago, 10 years ago, we would have completely different results. And I think that's just really important, especially when we're talking about flexing these less dominant parts of our personality. These grow over time, they shift over time. And this can be work related, it can be life related, it can be the work environment we're in, it can be what's happening in our personal lives. So this is the assessment I gave you both. This is a snapshot in time, but it's certainly not a life sentence, right? And if it fits, it fits. And if there's anything we want to shift or flex, we certainly have the ability to do that.
Yeah. So I found it to be very accurate and helpful. And I know how I respond to these things, because I typically like to bring my self-awareness to the forefront when I'm looking at these things. And I tend to look at them and see, well, did I know this before these were revealed to me? And then I look at, okay, what didn't I know? And what do I want to do with that information? Whereas, and it's interesting, when we talk about where we are now as opposed to where we would be 4 or 5 years ago, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I would be more apt to reject that. Those things that I did not necessarily like. I've been on a journey myself, and I've become more self-aware of my tendency to do that.
That's great. I love that. Yeah, I just love the awareness of your self-awareness.
Meta-awareness.
Yes.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. When you do this, now I'm going to weave back in some of the questions before you tell me about Whitnie. I'm dying to hear this because I have an idea of what you're going to say. So how do you use this with your clients to help them identify when they might need to flex a bit and change their leadership style to better suit the needs of their teams or individuals on their team?
Yeah, I think that's one of the strengths of this tool, is really knowing when to flex, and especially for people in like more formal leadership positions, when they do have a team that they're responsible for, or working with their, senior leaders, peers as well. It's being very strategic about how you do that, because again, we can exhaust ourselves trying to be more, let's say, more outgoing and going to networking events, or less data focused, right? Or maybe the opposite. Maybe a colleague is really kind of got that real social, enthusiastic persuasion. They may be exhausted by trying to do too many details. And so I work with clients to say, okay, what's that small shift that you can make that still, it feels tolerable, that you can do to really help connect with someone else. And then, so that's the first piece, is to just be strategic about that. And then sort of the next layer of strategy is, if you can only do this with one person, right? Let's say you have a team of 10 direct reports. The team members you want to focus on the most are the ones that are opposite from you, because chances are they are the ones that are going to most likely misunderstand what you're all about. And you're probably going to take more time to understand what they are all about.
That's great. That's great.
Just one quick story I'll share just because it always cracks me up when I think about this. I worked with a client who was very much in that results-driven category, just go, 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 just want to get things done. So his style of communication was just like firing off emails and messages, task only. And he had a Post-it note on his desktop that said, say hi and say thank you. Because it didn't matter to him. He wasn't being rude. It wasn't that he didn't care. It's just, why do I have to do that? I just need to get this information. Well, he learned, I actually do get results faster if I add just a little bit of warmth here to what I'm asking for.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. And the other piece of that is recognizing that there are those people for whom the hi and thank you matters. And then there are those people that are like him for whom, if he did that, would have the opposite effect, right? And going back to understanding who's on your team so that you can interact and communicate with them in a way that works for them. I think it's very easy for us to do things the way that works for us, but our roles as leaders really is to interact with people in a way that works for them, that isn't detrimental and harming to ourselves, right? And so there's that little balance piece in that.
And also, that's why I love starting with this assessment with clients, is that we're also not figuring all of this out about people on our team one coffee chat at a time. Like that can take years to get to know someone in that way. This is just a snapshot, gives you a great starting point, and then you can refine as you get to know the individual. Yeah. But we've got this really solid baseline where right away I know how to email you on my, on their third day at work.
So tell me about Whitnie.
I will tell you about Whitnie. I'm really curious if you're game for this, Robert. Any guesses? Like, do you think she's similar or different than you, than how you describe some of your strengths?
I think she's a little different. There's some intersection, but I think she's going to be a little different than me. That's my guess. My guess is that she's probably going to have a little more red than I did.
Yes. Yes. Great. Yes. And so I'll just explain too what the red means. The red is that more competitive driving spirit. And wanting to get things done. So the example I use for, fiery red, like maybe Whitnie, I don't know if you relate to this, but like I'm going to use an example just from my home. If it's Saturday during the holiday season and you need to like get your whole house decorated, you're going and you're not stopping until it's done. It's very like results driven. Like you want to start a task and end a task.
That part is true. If I ever decided to decorate my house, that would
be true. That's right. So I love that.
You're right. When I start something, I want to just keep going until it's done. Yeah.
So yeah, Whitnie does have a little bit more fiery red energy. The percentage, Robert, you have 61% and Whitnie has 79%. But spoiler alert, you are both wired very similar. The levels are a little bit different, but very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. We it's me and Whitnie have known each other for a long time. And it's interesting, we agree on most everything, but when we disagree, we're usually on opposite sides. It's interesting.
Yes. And my guess is too, that's a great point, because even if you are working with someone that has a similar, profile in this way that we're talking about, there are such differences. So let's just say like maybe the context and the data that Whitnie is using to make a decision may be different than the context and data that you're using for the decision, right? And so that's where conflict can still occur, even if we're working with someone that's very similar to us. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because just if there's no right or wrong makeup to have in a team setting, right? If opposites can be a wonderful complement to each other, and there can be a ton of conflict. Same with two similar profiles. It could go great and it can go poorly. the key ingredient, of course, is self-awareness. But yeah, I love that you were not surprised by that.
Oh, no,
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised either. I would have thought we were quite similar, and it would be degrees, right? Sort of the difference would be, a little shift here and there, but that the overall, I guess if there was a graph, the graph would be shaped similar, and maybe the highs and lows would be just nuanced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One other piece here, I'll just say, just because I love looking at both of your graphs too, is it would be interesting to look at this. And then as you're doing future projects together, you may think, oh, it might actually be nice if we had someone to go take this to networking events that we don't have to go to, right? Or someone else to sort of hold this role. You can kind of see like what would create even more balance in your partnership, which I think would be a fun exercise as well.
Yeah, what I liked about it is as I was taking it and as we're discussing it, you can see the flexibility in using the assessment, and I think it's really interesting because as I was reading the responses, and this is going to scream out to you, Emily. I was watching how they spelled certain words. I go, oh, this is from Great Britain. This is from the UK. And it's really funny because that's what my mind does. And so it was really pointing out that analytical aspect of myself, which I know Whitney has as well.
Yes. I noticed that as well. It was interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so I'm not surprised at all at the alignment whatsoever. And I was thinking about how Whitney and I, how we approach certain things when we don't always agree, and we welcome that because that friction creates creativity. It brings creativity, and that's where I got that. Yes, she probably has more red than I do because I'm more of a. We're having this discussion. I'm going to disengage, where she's more of going to talk about it a little bit more than I will. So I think that's very interesting. It's a very well thought out assessment.
I'm so glad you found value in it. And, I think you both definitely see how this can work really well in teams. And, everything that we're talking about, I know the three of us are immersed in this type of work, but you can imagine too how potent this can be, bringing it to a team or an individual, especially people younger in their careers that haven't had access to this yet. This can be a complete game changer for someone's career.
Absolutely. So I want to just use this to go back into some of the questions we have laid out, because I'm just having too much fun and I want to make sure we hit these questions.
Great, me too.
We've answered some of them already, but the one I want to ask, and I'm going to ask it a little different than how we have it notated, is how do you use this assessment to point out some biases or unconscious biases that people might have?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, so we can talk about it specifically. And we've touched on it briefly before that, the affinity bias is one of the most common ones we see, where we tend to either hire or work with or gravitate towards people that are most like us in all kinds of different ways. What this may look like in a work setting, you may be leading a meeting. And if you're the type of leader that, is just big ideas and likes to think out loud or likes to talk out loud to think through their ideas, you're asking for volunteers, asking who wants to be involved in a project, that's going to leave out the whole sector. It would leave out all three of us on the call who really prefer that think time and want the information and context before deciding if we want to proceed. Right. And so we can then see how teams and projects start getting formed with that affinity bias, because people are just naturally like, oh, they're excited. I'm excited. Let's go, without realizing that there's this other group of people that are really valuable on their team that are not being included by their natural leadership style. Nothing wrong with our leadership style. We want it to still be authentic, but we want that very excitable leader to also publish an agenda ahead of time. Send read ahead so that people can prepare, so that the three of us know what we want to ask before we go into that meeting.
So let's talk about this authenticity. So we talked about, or we know that some leaders have a problem really bringing their authentic self. We talked about it at the beginning of the show. trying to emulate others. How do you use this to really help people bring their authentic self and connect with their teams?
I find that this assessment is a beautiful doorway into deeper conversations, especially in the workplace. So, I had started off doing more personal coaching where that doorway was sort of naturally already open between myself and the client, that we were going to talk about kind of more personal obstacles, more of those inner obstacles. In the workplace, that setting isn't necessarily already in place. So having something like a framework and colors and names and language to start a conversation creates a lot of safety, so that they can start identifying. It really is up to the individual to bring that awareness. And it's important as a practitioner to let them guide how deep we go with it and when we do. I believe that everyone has such an innate wisdom, and we just need to follow that. And so someone may not be ready when they're 28 in their careers to really dive deep, and that's fine. But maybe when they're 48, they're ready to take a closer look at, okay, maybe there's something in the way. Why am I not showing up fully as I am? I feel like I'm holding myself back. Sort of once that tension is there, that curiosity tends to follow it.
That's great. Whitnie, anything you want to add to that?
No, I just wanted, I said no. But I was just thinking, what came to mind is we don't know what we don't know.
Yeah.
Right. And so even, I think we've talked about this on the show, and I don't remember what the numbers are, but just in general, most people think they are self-aware, but the studies show that we are not.
Yes.
And we're certainly not nearly as aware as we think we are. And it is through frameworks like this, the one that Robert uses, a different one, the ELI, and there are others that allow us to start to have some understanding, some objective understanding of who we are, and we can start to let the veil lift a little bit, and we don't have to be afraid of what we find on the other side. And so I self-awareness is, I think, and Robert can speak for himself, in terms of developing as a person and as a leader, the most important tool or skill that we can acquire, right? There are others, and we have a framework for a leadership method, simple, that it includes 5 other pillars, but without the self-awareness, the others are difficult to tap into. And so I'm really glad that you gave us the opportunity to take the assessment, and that as you are watching and listening, and whether it is with Emily or Robert or any other practitioner that has an assessment that gives you an opportunity to learn more about yourself in an objective way, avail yourself of that, right? Because the more we know, right, the more we can grow. And Emily said this earlier, we can't address things that we don't have any awareness around. Yeah. So that was me.
So I know we didn't follow the interview protocol to the letter, but I think we answered many of the questions, almost all of them, just through our conversations. I'm going to ask one more question, and then Whitnie, you can just take us home. But Emily, what's next for you and your work?
Yeah, so 2025 is shaping up to be hopefully a really fantastic year. So bringing this work to more and more companies and getting embedded sort of earlier in their employee life cycle. So I've got a couple of clients lined up to get to do this work starting in onboarding, which is exciting because that just creates the culture right from day one. And then, of course, deepening my own learning, right? We're always learning and growing as practitioners as well. And I just feel very lucky to be doing this work, to be having these conversations, to be meeting more and more people that really care about this. Obviously, we're a bit biased perhaps on this call, but, to what we've said many times is how critical this is in the workplace, and to be able to bring this to more and more places is, it's just a thrill for me.
Great. That's all I got, Whitnie.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Robert, for leading the discussion. Emily, thank you so much. If someone wanted to get in touch with you and work with you, take the assessment, or invite you into their workplace, how would they go about doing that?
Yes, they can find me on LinkedIn, Emily Ramos, and then the website here, The Catch Consulting. And I would love to meet with folks, and also just want to share too, if you're not sure what you need, no pressure. We can also direct you to the right resource. I know it can be kind of the Wild West to figure out what a team needs. So I'm also happy to just be a resource for people.
Awesome. We want to thank you for sharing, again, the assessment, and sharing your story and your experiences, your knowledge and expertise around leadership and self-awareness, and just taking the time to be here on the program with us.
Oh, what a pleasure. I cannot thank you both enough. This was so fun.
Great. Thank you. Robert, real quickly, if someone wanted to reach out to you, how would they go about doing that?
And they can reach me at inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com, or they can just go to Robert Hilliard Coaching, fill out that communication form, there, and tell me what they want to work on. We'll set up a discovery call and see if we're a good fit.
Awesome. And if you want to reach out to me about coaching or about being on the program, if you are a leader in any capacity and you want to come and share, we love talking with everyone about leadership. Reach out. You can get to me at shiftingintoaction.now.site, shiftingintoaction.now.site. We are happy to be, we're 3 weeks into the new year, so we are happy to be here. And if there's anything that we can do to be of service to you, please feel free to reach out. Again, we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond, talking all things leadership. So until next time, take care.
Bye now.